It's time to settle in, get cozy, and let your imagination run wild as we take you on a journey of discovery. Each video is a gateway to a world of funniest stories with a touch of mind-blowing facts. Prepare to have your horizons expanded, your curiosity piqued, and your preconceptions shattered. This captivating collection will surely help you relax after a tiring day at work. So, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Serious, whose life did you unintentionally screw up? Story 1. I can't blame myself too much, but this is all pretty recent, so I feel a little responsible. My best friend growing up used to have his grandpa take us home every day together. In high school, my best friend growing up dated this girl. They dated for roughly 2 or 3 weeks and ended it, so it wasn't very serious at all. Over a year later, I somehow ended up getting close to her and asked my friend if it was okay because of their previous relationship. He said it was fine and to go for it. Well, I did, and he didn't take it so well, but didn't really show it. Me and him had naturally grown apart at this time, but we're still good friends, just didn't hang out together daily. He was a bigger kid, but after that, he started losing weight like crazy. Then, not long after, the remains of his father's body were found when he passed away in a tragic accident during his childhood 12 years earlier. He also took this really hard, obviously. We grew completely apart, and I continued dating this girl through high school until we broke up senior year. He couldn't handle seeing us around each other, so we pretty much stopped talking altogether. Freshman year of college, though, we reconnected and spent some time together. It started becoming more frequent, and he was coming to parties with me, and we would hang out at his house. Around this time, though, I reconnected with this girl. We had some time apart, and getting back together at our age, we were taking it seriously. My friend didn't disappear this time, but I did notice he had slowly been drinking more. He was already drinking heavily before we got back together, but I thought it was just like all of us college kids were doing. We all drank, smoked, and generally did nothing if it wasn't schoolwork. One night, though, I went to his house and noticed it was a bit much. I watched him drinking full glasses of gin and eventually blacking out in the backyard. I moved him to his bed, and his girlfriend watched him all night. This was the last time we talked, and he removed all communication with me. Years went by, and I tried to reach back out. He and his girlfriend had a kid, but broke up. He had blocked me on Facebook, and if I tried to text or call, he wouldn't answer. Time just kept going, and I always thought about him. 3 weeks ago, I got a call that he had shot himself in his driveway. You can't help but wonder what you could have done or how much you contributed. I wished I'd reached out. I don't think just the girl coming between us was the sole reason at all, but he had said to his girlfriend that he thought about taking his life. He said he couldn't do anything right, and he didn't have anyone to turn to. His life didn't go how it should have at all. He was top of our class and had such potential, but decided to go to a smaller school at home. He failed out and stopped going, while the rest of us moved on with our lives. I wish I would have tried more. Story 2. It was middle school, and we were taking one of those state-based tests. I don't really remember the name, but it was the history portion. Our history teacher wasn't the nicest woman, and she wasn't fair, so no one really was that thrilled to be in her class that day. I remember sitting down, carrying my backpack, and tossing it to the side. I was in a bad mood, and so I just kind of threw it down, not really caring about it. I just wanted to get this test over with and then take a nap, because they made us put our head down when we were done. 20 minutes into the test, and I'm blazing through it. I do love history, so I had no problem, despite our mean teacher. She was walking along each aisle, checking each person, making sure nobody was cheating. One kid already yelled at us, so we were afraid to look up. I saw her shadow approach from the left side, slowly working down the aisle. Afraid to look up, I stared at my paper, but a scream next to me spiked my head up. "Ah!" she wailed as her elderly body went flying, her body landing on the ground with a big whomp. She tripped on my backpack. I looked down in shock. "I can't get up. I can't get up," she wailed on the ground. I was frozen in fear when a teacher's aide ran to her. "Aide, go get the principal. Everyone out of the class," she yelled. We all were rushed into the hall. More teachers arrived, then the principal. An ambulance came as there was a hospital close by, and then she was taken away. "Did you trip the teacher?" Noodle tripped the teacher. It spread like wildfire. I was suddenly the kid who tripped the teacher. The next day we had a substitute and the principal in the class with us as we were about to finish the tests. This is why you're supposed to tuck your backpacks under your desk, not in the aisles. I never got in trouble for it. It was never pushed to my family. We got a replacement teacher who was actually really cool, and history became a lot more fun again. I learned later about our history teacher coming back. She had damaged her arm and hip permanently, needing a walker. She was getting medically retired, but came to say hello to some old students. I never saw her, but one of my best friends did. The teacher commented on, "It's important to forgive, especially those who have wronged you." She had stared directly at my best friend at this time, knowing she and I were close. The history teacher left the school that day, never to be seen again. Story 3. A friend of mine in high school, we were taking a statewide exam on European history, and the second part required writing 3 essays. 1 in response to a series of documents, and 2 extended response essays based on given prompts. All 24 of us took the exam in a large auditorium with nothing separating people, and yet you obviously were barred from talking or sharing answers, discussing questions, etc., general test stuff. Anyway, the essay section starts, and my friend next to me starts motioning to me on the side of the table with his hand. First, he holds up 2 fingers, then 3, then 2, then 3, repeated a few times. Now, I have no idea what this means. Literally 0, zilch, nada. And I'm terrified that we're going to get accused of collaborating and have our results nullified. So I just flash him a peace sign. 2 fingers. He nods and begins writing. Crisis averted? After the exam, I asked him, what was the point of the finger gestures? And he responded, "Oh, I was asking how many essays we had to write. Thanks for the help." Needless to say, he did very, very poorly on that exam. Messed up his life? Nah, no way. He went to a good school, graduated high in his class, etc., but I definitely messed up that class for him, and the guilt of it has been looming over me for years. Well, what do you know? It appears from the last 2 stories that there's a bad omen with taking history exams, and it poses a real risk of screwing up someone's life. But one of the purposes of history as a subject is to learn from the past and hope for a better future where we don't repeat the same mistakes. So let's all heed these warnings and be extra cautious if anyone has any upcoming state exams. Story 4. My parents. I came from a middle, upper-class family, so my parents paid for everything while I was in college. Housing, tuition, groceries, everything. I had my dad's credit card, and at 20, I started going out to the bar and spending lots of their money. They continued to support me, to pay for everything, and I continued to abuse it for years while ignoring their threats that they would shut off the credit card, which they never did. My dad sent me a heartbreaking email one day that said I'd spent all of his retirement money, and they were struggling to pay the mortgage. It absolutely broke my heart, and I cried just thinking about it. It ruined my relationship with my parents. It's been a few years, and I'm making quite a bit of money now. Our relationships are better than they've ever been. At any opportunity I can, I send them money and will continue to do so until they tell me to stop. I will forever be indebted to them for everything they've done for me, and I'll do anything I can to help them live comfortably for the rest of their lives, because that's what they've done for me. To those who grew up in a loving family, don't ever forget how much your parents love you. Don't ever take it for granted like I did. Story 5. I guess you could describe him as the trenchcoat kid. Let's call him Bob because I don't want to keep referring to him as trenchcoat kid. It just feels wrong. Of my middle school. Bob was a pretty troubled kid and was picked on quite a bit by people. One day our class was at a nearby park for a type of relaxing field trip after midterms. Some of my friends and I were being dumb kids and sword fighting with sticks. I didn't know that Bob was nearby watching us, and during our sword fighting, I swung the stick around behind me trying to be cool. Turns out I accidentally hit Bob with it, and it was his last straw before breaking. He tackled me from behind and started choking me until I lost consciousness. I was told that one of my friends tried to pull him off, while others went to grab the teacher, but couldn't get him off me, even after I was out cold. He was expelled and sent to a juvenile correctional facility for what basically amounted to attempted red rum. I have no idea what happened to him since then, but I wonder how his life would have turned out if he had gotten help instead of shipped off like a criminal, all because I was being stupid and accidentally hit him with a stick. I wouldn't feel too bad for this kid. Yeah, he clearly had existing pent-up issues that should have been addressed sooner, but the fact that he snapped at you so brutally and got sent to a correctional facility could be the kind of help that he actually needed. These places are meant to correct behavior, after all, so maybe in the grand scheme of it all, he'll look back one day and think of this incident as a positive turning point in his life. Story 6. By sophomore year of college, I'd figured out a pretty good rhythm for partying really hard, while still getting good grades. At the beginning of the semester, a friend of a friend joined our group. He was a freshman, super smart, and also extremely straight edge. He'd never drank or even really been to a party. None of us pressured him into anything, just invited him to join us, but he started to get into the college party vibe pretty quickly. I guess I just assumed everyone had the same work ethic towards school as me. Even though I went out a lot, I still studied every night, never missed assignments, etc. But apparently my new friend didn't get quite as good a rhythm. He started to miss class more and more, went out more and more, forgot about major projects, etc. He ended up failing his first semester of college, and last I heard from him, he joined the military and shipped out overseas. No clue where he ended up. Story 7. My friends, and subsequently her families, our group of friends decided to just go out one night and party like crazy. We were just being dumb and doing stupid teenage stuff. We were all reckless and thought we were invincible. And then she passed away. I don't feel like it was solely my fault, but I do feel like I contributed to ruining her life because I was there, and I was being as irresponsible as everyone around me. I get physically ill when I see posts about her every now and then. It's even worse when I interact with her parents, which isn't often, and I know that's terrible, but I can't bring myself to face them. I almost puked when they were tearfully telling my friends and me stories of my friends' childhoods and talking about the things they regretted with their parenting, as though them yelling at her over not cleaning her room or stuff like that while she grew up led to her passing. We were the worst thing to happen to her. Story 8. Pat, the alcoholic regular at the truck stop I used to work nights at, he used to come in every night for a bottle of Rumplemint's before heading home. He was clearly drunk, but a friendly and good-natured one. One day he stopped coming in, and nobody saw him for over a year. Then, during my last week on the job, he comes in to get gas, and I'm so glad to see him that I bought his traditional bottle of booze for him as a gift, since I was leaving. 6 months later, I learned that he had disappeared for that year to cut his ties in the area and move to the West Coast to sober up and get his life together. He had managed to kick the booze and start rebuilding his life when he came back to town to pick up some things from his old home before leaving the area forever. He was on his way out of town toward a new life when I gave him that bottle. He relapsed and ended his own life a few months later. Women, when did you first notice that men were looking at you in a sensual way? How old were you, and how did it make you feel? Story 1. When I was 12, my mom and I were at a small, carry-out-only restaurant waiting for our order to be ready. This older guy, who looked like he was about 20, came in. He just stared at me, open-mouthed. I had to walk past him to fill my drink, and he said, "Hey, baby, give me some of that T&A." I didn't even know what T&A was. He even positioned himself so I would have to walk past him again when we left the restaurant, and he made another comment where he called me princess. Anyway, when we got in the car, I just broke down crying. I was so ashamed. My mom had no idea that any of that had just occurred, and I told her that I didn't know what I had done wrong. I thought for sure I must have looked at him or done something to make him think that it was okay to talk and look at me like that. My mom assured me that it was nothing that I had done, and that now that I was developing, things like that were going to happen a lot more frequently. If I'd been older, the whole incident would have been fairly innocuous. But I was only 12, and I definitely looked very young, even though I had a chest and hips, so it was mildly traumatizing. What I find so disturbing now that I'm adults is how frequently older grown men would look and make these types of comments at me from the ages of 12 to 17. Like I said before, I looked very young, and I didn't dress provocatively. There's no way they could have mistaken me for over 18. Story 2. I'm pretty sure I was around 7 or 8 when me and a friend of mine were walking back from the waterfront to her house, about 2 blocks away, in bathing suits. When we started walking, we noticed a car behind us, with tinted windows, was driving very slowly. So we decided to walk around the block and try to confuse the driver, but he continued to follow us. We walked up and down streets, and we ended up about 10 blocks away from her house, with this car following us very slowly when I decided to call the cops. I feel extremely lucky that I had just gotten a cell phone because we asked the cop to come under cover so the driver wouldn't speed off, and they played along. A few minutes later, we had stopped on the porch of some random person's house, and the driver pulled over across the road and waited. Another car came down the street and pulled over. A man rolled down the window and showed us his police badge and asked if we were okay. Suddenly, 2 other cop cars came down the street on opposite sides, and the driver tried to run out of his car and behind the house, but the cops caught him. He was recently released from jail on kidnapping and possession of CP charges. I don't think I've ever experienced anything quite as terrifying as that. Story 3. This 1999 or 2000, I was 12 and my mom was getting me a cell phone. This was before cell phones were as common for kids to have. I came home with my cell phone and got my first call. It was the young guy who set us up with the phone and the plan. He called to tell me that he thought I was hot and that he has my number since he set me up with my phone. I just talked to him, being overly nice as I wasn't really sure what to do. My mom noticed me on the phone and asked who I would even be calling. The phone was basically to call her and only her. I told her that the guy that sold us the phone was trying to get a date with me. She grabbed the phone and yelled into it, "She's 10 years old, and you should be ashamed. If you ever call again, I'll go to the police." He got off the phone quickly. I looked at my mom and said, "But I'm 12. He needs to feel the additional shame of being a pig." My mother ended up going to the store and getting the guy fired. Apparently this wasn't the first time he'd used his job to get numbers of women to call. This time he got fired. Story 4. I was probably 11 or so. I remember sitting at school in a science class, and some guys used to throw pens and other stuff on the ground next to me, so naturally, I would lean down and pick it up for them. It took me a while to understand why they were laughing when I would do that. Turns out they were stealing glances down my shirt. I just remember laughing, making me feel so uncomfortable. I used to play Dance Dance Revolution a lot when I was 11 and 12, good enough to be coordinated at it. I used to think all the guys that would hang out at the arcade were watching me play because I was good, or they were waiting their turn. Nope, it's because I developed early and they liked watching my boobs bounce. It was mortifying when I found out a few years later after I befriended one of them. While so far all of these have felt really creepy, and I suspect they won't get much better from here on out, this last one at least was age appropriate. It's one thing for boys to be interested in girls their own age, especially as they're starting to go through puberty, but all these older men preying on preteen girls is just disgusting. Story 5. I used to walk to the newsagents after school most nights, just for something to do, really, and to get out of the house. By age 14, I started to notice some men in cars would slow a little and stare. Some would smile and wink, etc. I was still in my school uniform. I remember I started to get changed before going out after that. Nice big hoodies, etc. I found age 14 an uncomfortable and strange age. My sister-in-law did a similar thing. As soon as she realized she was getting breasts, she wore a hoodie, all the time. This wouldn't be that notable, except that we live in South Florida. She would wear a heavy black hoodie in 95-degree Florida weather. Needless to say, she didn't go outside much. Story 6. I'm not positive about my age. I think I was around 12 or 13. I was at a pool party, and all the boys, some of whom were a few years older than me, kept commenting on my suit. I was the only one at the party in a string bikini, so I guess it was noticeable. At first I was embarrassed because I was unsure how to respond. Should I be combative? Friendly? Should I be complimenting them as well? I didn't feel uncomfortable exactly, just unsure of the best way to react. I think part of me was flattered as well. I'd always been a bit more on the awkward side, so being noticed by cute older boys was new and exciting. There were many instances after this where I did feel bad or uncomfortable about being noticed by the opposite gender, but as far as first experience goes, it really sparked my curiosity more than anything else. I remember asking myself what I had done to warrant such attention and wondering if it was something that I should be hoping to accomplish again. Story 7. I developed fairly early, much to the dismay of my super crazy religious mother and grandmother. Suddenly, when we went out in public, my mother would always walk between me and other people. She'd get furious with me if she overheard anything that could be construed as a remark about my looks. If someone did look at me, she'd make snide remarks on how trampy my clothes were, that she had freaking bought me no less, and how it was my fault for wearing revealing clothes, t-shirt and shorts most of the time, rather than making me feel like I should be offended. Instead, she made me feel like I was disgusting. I spent a very long time thinking that I wasn't attractive, and that the only reason anyone would ever want me is to be intimate. I still have a few issues with this, but for the most part, I'm okay now. So in closing, parents, your little girls are going to grow up. Please guide them on how to dress according to their personal morals and values, but don't teach them that their bodies are something to be ashamed of. Couldn't agree more with this one. Ultimately, it's your body, and you should feel good about it in whatever way you choose to express yourself. But the problem arises when you feel like others are imposing their own views on you, whether it's a parent wrongly shaming you or a creeper objectifying you. It just really sucks when you can't feel comfortable in your own skin. Story 8. I was 8, had wandered away from my mom at Kmart. A creepy 40-something-year-old white guy in construction attire stared at my chest and butt and followed me all around the store. I even went into the changing room to get away from him. Stupid idea, I know, but come on, I was 8. He followed me into the changing room, tried to pull and shake the locked stall door open that I was hiding behind. I sat curled into a ball on the changing seat, staring at this dirty work boots just on the other side of that door, terrified. Thank God a woman walked in to try on some clothes, saw him, and screamed at him to get out. After he had left, I ran out and found my mom. I will never forget how frightened I was. I had no idea what he wanted with me, but the way he stared and his aggression trying to pull that changing room door open made me feel so sick and ashamed of my body, and I wondered what I had done to make him come after me. Story 9. Around age 11, myself and my cousin, she was also 11, were walking from the beach to the cottage, in shorts and t-shirts. A car with 3 men began driving slowly next to us, asking for directions and for us to get in to show them where some campground was. We went into a convenience store and used their phone to call our grandmother to come get us, pre-cell phones. The men were parking in the parking lot and followed our car to the cottage, which was set back from the road, and had to go through trees and such to get to it. They parked out on the road by the entrance. My uncle, cousin's father, was told they were parked there and went out with his shotgun to ask if there were any problems. They didn't stick around. From that point on, I became more aware of the yelling out car windows, the stares, the requests to get into vehicles. Seriously, guys, does this ever work? Story 10. I was 13, and I remember my friend and I would count how many men, adult men, beeped or yelled things as we walked. It felt embarrassing. It made me feel like I was under a microscope, and I became so aware of how I looked and held myself. It was like I was not a human, but something that exists for the pleasure of men. Of course, I didn't think about it quite as in depth when I was 13, but looking back, I can see why I felt embarrassed and self-conscious. Even when I was a kid, there was a huge distinction between my emotions when a boy talked to me and reciprocal flirting, and that one-sided interaction where you're passive and there's this guy yelling that you're hot. Some people might like it, and I don't judge them for that, but I'd like that whole catcalling thing to stop. I find it really freaking sad that most of our stories, including mine, all happen around 13 or 14, and the harassment is usually by older men. What the frick is wrong with the world? Story 11. I was 11. I had started to grow my boobs, and my step-grandfather cornered me in my parents' room one day. He stuck his tongue in my mouth and grabbed me. I didn't know what to do, so I pushed him away a little, said, Abuelito, do you want a hug? And hugged him. When I was 12, walking into the grocery store with my dad, there was an older guy who kept his eyes glued to my chest. My dad was ready to punch him if he said anything. Around 12 or so, all I wanted was to be grown up, so having grown-up men stare at me felt pretty cool. I thought I was hot, but now looking back, it was freaked up. I looked like a child. Story 12. I remember being in high school and an old guy in a convertible pulling up next to me while I was walking from one store to another in a strip mall. After a simple, "Hi, how are you doing?" type thing, he asked me if I wanted a ride to where I was going. I said no thanks, and he drove off. I guess I was 14 or 15 at the time. The thing is, this is a classic thing that my parents would freak out if it happened to their daughter, but it happened to pretty much everyone I ever mentioned it to in my teenage circle of gals, and we always just laughed it off. We never realized just how disturbing it was at the time. Divorce lawyers, what's the worst way someone screwed over their spouse? Story 1. Not a divorce attorney, but I clerked for a judge that handled divorce cases. We had a couple that were both lieutenant colonels in the Air Force. They had one daughter that was about 11 or 12. Both had graduate degrees and were generally intelligent people. Well, the husband had an affair, and things went sour with the relationship. The daughter was at that age when her relationship with the mother was starting to get a little strained, and she mentioned how she wanted to stick with her dad because he was about to be stationed elsewhere and the parents would be going their separate ways. The mother absolutely freaked out. The first thing she did was go to the local police department and claim the father had been molesting and R-ing the daughter. They investigated and couldn't find any evidence, so they dropped the case. The mother, still furious, then goes to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations and reports the same thing. The Air Force then suspends the husband from duty and conducts their own investigation. Same results. No evidence of wrongdoing, and the case is dropped. The mother then goes to the next state over, where the husband is about to be transferred, and contacts the local police there with the same story about molestation and assaults. They, of course, do their own investigation, but the same results. Case is dropped. Of course, this whole time the daughter has been interviewed a dozen times by psychologists, various therapists, the police, the Air Force, and who knows else. The daughter is straight up traumatized by this. People constantly asking if her dad had been touching her or R-ing her and so forth. Not to mention the harm it did to her father's career. He was basically screwed from any possible promotion just because of the allegations, as well as the fact that infidelity in the military is a big no-no. But that was his own doing. Well, once word of all this gets back to the judge, he's furious. He's a former Air Force JAG, and this has context in the ranks. Well, anyway, the couple comes in front of him one day for a hearing, and he outright tells her she better stop this behavior or he's going to hold her in contempt of court for the maximum amount of time that he can lawfully hold her in the cell. Contact the DA and recommend the filing of charges, contact her Air Force superiors, and recommend reprimand to the fullest extent possible, and basically anything and everything he can do within his power. It was one of the most messed up things I've seen during my relatively short experience in the legal world. Story 2. I've worked for a lawyer who worked on divorces. This was his favorite case. Guy was making $150,000 a year, gets a Thai mail-order bride, and has 3 kids. Dude has an affair and now decides that he doesn't want a fresh-off-the-boat wife and mixed-race kids and initiates a divorce. The woman's only priority is to have custody of the kids, so against her attorney's advice, she's willing to take a deal where she takes a car and gets $1,200 in child support, no spousal support, and $3,000 lump sum from their joint account so she can rent an apartment. There's zero chance that he actually wants custody of the children because he's already shacked up with the girl he's having an affair with. She wanted full custody so bad that she was willing to live with 3 kids in a modest 2-bedroom apartment and put the kids out of expensive extracurricular activities they were doing to economize, as well as getting a crappy survival type of job after being nothing but a housewife since coming to the U.S. One of the kids has some talent in an Olympics event to the level where she was getting professional coaching lessons. The husband takes it to the front of the judge against the advice of his own attorney, who tells him that he's nuts to turn this down because he doesn't want to give her $3,000 and figures that the judge will decide between what she wants and what he wants, not realizing that there's a formula based on income judges use to determine child support payments. At the court, the judge awards the wife the $3,000 lump sum and $1,700 child support for each kid. So because he didn't want to give his ex-wife $3,000 so his kids could have a place to live, about 50% of his take-home pay is going to his ex for the next 10-plus years. The attorney I worked with was a hard butt about money who never did anything for free, but this was the one case where he represented the woman for just a nominal fee because he had a justice renob. Story 3. When I got divorced, my alcoholic wife of 18 years had started another affair, this time with her addictions counselor. My lawyer and I laid a trap for them. Just in case you don't know, intimate relations between a counselor and patient are very frowned upon by the regulatory bodies, and I was more than angry after putting her through rehab, $25,000, which I didn't have to do, only to have her fall back into her old behavior. Shortly before the divorce was finalized, I filed a complaint with the state body licensing health professions. Knowing they were in some peril because of their unprofessional relationship, I had already gotten him fired. She had backed off her exorbitant demands. I paid her a very modest settlement, kept the house, got custody of the 3 tweenage kids, plus got child support. Her lawyer naturally included a clause in the divorce where I had to agree to not say anything negative about her lover and their relationship. But the lawyer messed up and never asked if I had already filed charges and thus didn't require me to rescind them. The lawyer had assumed I was just bad-mouthing them to neighbors and friends, and it never occurred to the lawyer that we were doing much more. When the Board of Health Professions responded to my complaint shortly after the divorce was finalized, I told them that it would take a subpoena to get me to testify. A subpoena trumps a divorce settlement. They were happy to oblige. They stripped his license and placed him on a register of sanctioned health professionals. He never worked again. They were broke in a handful of years, and she divorced him when the money ran out. In the interim, his mother had passed away, leaving a fair-sized estate, so it took longer than I expected. Oh, and the frosting on the cake was that his wife and I traded notes, notably hotel receipts from the time of the affair, that helped each of us in our respective divorces. Justice was served. Story 4. This kinda fits here. My friend's parents were getting divorced, and it was super ugly. It went to court due to the accusations being made. Her basis of the divorce was him cheating with the neighbor, who was the stunning 20-something married woman, and the mom wanting half of everything even though she had never worked and lived off the dad. The lawyer's deal was if he admitted he was cheating with women, things would be split equally and a small sum of money to be exchanged. She had signed this paperwork and it was handed to the court ready for him to sign. He signed it in court but then had a confession to make. Turned out the dad was sleeping with the neighbor's husband. The deal was the woman, not the man. The mom lost everything in the divorce, as did the female neighbor. Dad and male neighbor then moved in together and have been together since. Edit. Mom did not get with the female neighbor. She moved into a friend's house a few doors down and moved to a different place altogether a few months later. Dad and male neighbor moved in together next door to the ex-wife, who then moved her now husband in. They get on really well now, better than ever, and even go for family meals together. Well, that's some straight-up Count Olaf deviousness. And by that I mean the far stretch of comparison between Count Olaf's wedding certificate needing to be signed by using the dominant hand, and this guy's divorce clause stating woman versus man. But that's the beauty and the pain of legal contracts. The devil is in the details. Story 5. A girl and her mother hired a private investigator who obtained pictures of her husband and his boss cheating on their spouses in the home of a government official who had been accepting their bids for contract work with the state for years. The photographs also showed them drinking and driving in the company vehicles. By agreeing not to receive alimony, she was able to raid the hell out of savings, retirement, and get debt paid off, as well as a general lump sum of cash up front. But then, after the settlement, the pictures of their highly illegal activities were sent to the company owners, who promptly fired his manager for wild impropriety, the drinking on the job, and had ex-husband submit his resignation for the same thing. The government official also lost her job, which meant her employee, who the husband was sleeping with, also lost a job. So the dude got ruined and she made bank. She also got out of a very unhappy marriage, guilt-free, whereas beforehand she felt obligated to remain in a very abusive relationship due to religious hang-ups. The thing is, she has to be one of the sweetest girls I know, but man, does she know how to get revenge. Story 6. She fights and will not grant the divorce easily. So I do the most sinister thing I can do. I screw her over like she screwed that guy. I told her she can keep the house, no issue. She agrees. I bought the house for $323,000 back when the market was booming. This divorce happened during the recession. The house was valued at $156K. I walked away from it smiling. I knew she couldn't live up to the lifestyle I was giving her. She started falling behind on her payments. Her SUV got repoed. The house was in foreclosure. While I, on the other hand, went down the road and bought a house worth $500K when the market was high for $212K when the market bubble had blown. Too long didn't read, walked away from a house during the recession, let her go into debt while I went down the street to purchase a bigger house for less cost than the house I walked away from. Story 7. Not a divorce lawyer, but this happened in New York City a number of years ago and is just too sweet not to include here. Some dentist or doctor on the Upper East Side and his wife were having a freaking nasty divorce, and she got their gorgeous Upper East Side brownstone worth several $1,000,000, which angered him royally. So the butthole went into the brownstone, turned on all the gas, let the place fill with gas, and blew it up, totally destroying the building and ending his own life in the process. Turns out the joke was on him because the now empty lot was worth a poop ton more money than the house was. How often is a buyer going to get a prime building lot for a new house on the Upper East Side of Manhattan? The lot was worth about double what the house was, if I recall correctly, and the wife got it all. Story 8. Not a lawyer, but this is the history of my house and property. The house used to be owned by a very successful businessman. The property is gorgeous. It overlooks a river and marsh, backed up by thousands of acres of forest and untouched beauty in Wisconsin. Back about 20 years ago, the wife and husband got into a bitter divorce. The wife loved the property. It's beautiful. She loved the river and birds and all the nature around it. So what did the husband do? He, as the owner of the property, deeded it all to Nature Preserve and the state. Something like 5,000 acres of new public land were created. We the people won, but she lost big time. My house is the only one on the river in that area, but there are now tons of public access points, and we all enjoy sharing the land with our community. This guy found a great way to twist the knife in the wound in a way that also benefited the greater good. But instead of the last story, which was more along the lines of, if I can't have it, nobody can, where he demolished the entire property, this dude did the exact opposite and declared, if I can't have it, then everybody can, and effectively ruined the appeal only for the one person he wanted to enact revenge on. Story 9. Obligatory not a lawyer, but I used to work for a security company, the big one. I had a customer call in and request to have her current deactivation code set as her panic code. A panic code gives the appearance of deactivating the system, but sends a super high priority alarm signal to the monitoring company. This feature exists in case someone puts a gun to your head and demands that you disarm your system. So if the husband did come by while she was away, violating a court order by misunderstanding, the cops were going to show up real freaking fast. Rich people, what do we 99% desire that actually kind of sucks? Story 1. I'm not crazy rich like some of the people posting here, but my wife makes really big money that probably puts us in the top 1%, but not top 1%. Also, neither of us grew up rich at all. Stay in school, kids. I keep trying to explain to people that when you get into that top income bracket, most of your extra money gets spent on BS that doesn't really make you any happier. My wife always complains to me that she doesn't feel rich and doesn't believe she's in the top 1%. It's because she's comparing herself to the neighbors or the people she works with, who always seem to have more stuff. At least 3 times I had to show her articles saying what the cutoff was for the top 1% before she would finally believe me. It couldn't possibly be that low, she said to me the first time. So, to me, tell you a little story about our kitchen fridge. I call it the Toyota, kind of as a joke. The reason is that it cost $15,000, More than a Toyota Yaris, that is. How do you wind up spending $15,000 on a fridge, you ask? Well, my wife wanted to renovate the kitchen. In our neighborhood, that means you're going to spend at least $100,000. I put it off a couple years, but eventually gave in. She doesn't have time to run around to stores. Big job equals no free time. And she hates my taste. So she hired both an interior decorator and kitchen designer. We already had a pretty new stainless steel GE fridge that probably cost $3,000 or so. But when the cupboard designs came in, the kitchen designer absolutely insisted that we get a counter-depth fridge so that the door would not stand proud of the cabinets, but would instead be flush. I thought it was a bit stupid to throw away a perfectly good fridge, then buy a shallower one with less room to put stuff in, so that it wouldn't stand proud of the cabinets. But I'm not the one paying, so my opinion wasn't really the one that mattered. As a compromise, my wife agreed that we would get one that was wider. Once you go wider than standard, right away that puts you in the 10K and up range. We looked at the Sub-Zero, didn't love it, saw a Miele that had nice halogen lights inside, and next thing you know, we were buying a $15,000 fridge. Ridiculous decision, but it doesn't even matter. I didn't even notice the Visa bill. It just got paid. But you know what? In the end, it's just a kitchen and it's just a fridge. It doesn't suck or anything, although lots of super expensive fridges do, but it doesn't have any magical properties, and now that I'm used to it, I don't even notice that it looks nice. It's just there, and it keeps the food cold. Maybe it's because I'm not the one making the big money, but I can't help noticing how much of it just gets spent on BS that's expensive for no reason other than to get rich people to buy it. That's one reason that I never complain about taxes. We waste tons of money just because we have so much of it. If the government wants to take some away and use it to build a subway, or pay for someone's health care, or give it to a poor person, it seems to me that's a better use for it. The people who complain about their taxes, it seems to me, have just totally lost perspective. If people understood just how much money us rich folks are spending on meaningless crap, they would be outraged. But this grill is not a grill, it's just a greasy spoon without you. Story 2. Here are some observations from a 17-year-old still growing up in a wealthy household. Number 1, I live in blissful ignorance of my family's finances. Ask me about my parents' yearly salaries, income, our investments, household net worth, etc., and I couldn't tell you anything except that we are ultra high net worth, more than $50 million US. Don't know how much exactly. My parents deliberately keep me in the dark when it comes to money, and I'm completely okay with that. I think they made this decision because, first off, no one wants some loudmouthed kid talking about how rich their family is, especially not where I'm from. In the first grade, one of my classmates was kidnapped for over $100 million US. She was safely returned a day later. It is not very safe to be rich and high profile about it. It's also considered low class to talk about money, no matter who you are. Also, they never wanted me to develop a superiority complex because of my family's money. In my view, I never have. That being said, I guess there is one downside to this. Number 2, the rich kid's invisible hand notion of having a never-ending, limitless amount of cash to spend. Obviously, this isn't a truth, but a perception. By never-ending, I mean that wealth has basically been a constant throughout my life, not visibly affected by financial crisis, tax raises, and so on. By limitless, I mean that I have never faced something that I cannot afford. As such, I think that rich kids are not necessarily big spenders, but are careless spenders for sure. When you literally have an unfathomably large amount of money at your disposal, it's so actually easier to spend than to save. Number 3, in terms of spending, my family has a very much quality over quantity mindset. For my family, budget constraints are so high, they're out of sight, out of mind. It's not that the price of a good determines my perceived marginal benefits from it. I love the 50-cent street foods in my native country, but I do have the power of choice to substitute a less desirable good for a more desirable luxury good, and I do this often. My mother once told me, if something is going onto or into your body, it better be high quality. Number 4, on that note, I guess you want anecdotal evidence of the above points, so here are some cool things I've grown up with and noticed. Growing up, we always had maids, drivers, cooks, etc. This is actually very common among upper and upper middle class families outside America. My family all has Amex Black cards, Centurion. We don't use some of the more ridiculous services, that is, personal butlers and concierges, but have used the hotel and travel benefits many times. Personal shoppers, $10,000 US, SAT boot camp, etc., etc. Our home security systems have included bodyguards, temporary, biometrics, bulletproof glass, panic rooms, fake security cameras to prevent the domestic help from stealing. I've never had an allowance, budget, scholarship, or part-time job. Wealthy Americans will gladly renounce their citizenships because of the income tax. The rich kids of Instagram are considered very shameful to their families, where I'm from, as are reality TV shows about rich kids, rich housewives, etc., etc. My parents grew up dirt poor, displaced by various dictatorships, persecutions, etc. at the time. As a result, they are very humble, not big spenders at all, and while they aren't coupon clippers, they do love a good deal. Story 3. I'd say being wealthy overall has major downsides people don't always anticipate. I would summarize the issues I've faced as being trust, building relationships, and dealing with people's expectations. Trust. Do you actually want to be my friend, or are you just hoping I'll pick up the check? This happens a lot, and especially considering many of my friends are fresh out of college and don't have as much, I often do pick up the check, because I'd rather us go out on me than not go out at all. But if I'm not offering to pay, nobody shows up. What's worse than that is when people get used to you doing it and start to expect that you'll cover everything. If I'm offering, it's a gift. If not, it's BS to assume I'm paying. I joined a fraternity in college, and at certain points covered the expenses of an event, say by buying all the party supplies or decorations, paying a fee or a bill for the house, covering new members' expenses or someone's dues one month, and I was happy to do it. And then one day during a meeting, we were discussing our chapter's debt, and it came up that everyone was hoping I would pay the entire chapter's debt, about 10 grand altogether. I had to have a very frank discussion with the guys that day. My dad's a prominent corporate attorney. People constantly hit him up for favors, jobs, legal advice, money, etc., constantly. As I started working in the industry, the same thing has started with me more and more. Building relationships. As I mentioned, it can get hard to gauge if a person is interested in you or your bank account. It's also difficult to just get to know someone. Some people write you off because they think that you think you're better than they are. People are usually either really interested in your money or they're really not, sometimes to the point of resentment. People judge themselves through what they think are my eyes. You don't know me just because you find out my bank statements are financial corn. People's assumptions and expectations. I do not live like a reality TV star. I drive a nice car, but it's 3 years old, and I'm not upgrading anytime soon. I live in a nice loft, but it's primarily because it's a block from my office, and all my furniture is from IKEA. Some of my clothes are from Target, some are from Nordstrom's. My favorite restaurant is a hole in the wall in the ghetto. I'm completely liberal. People assume if you're wealthy, you're a conservative, a snob, an elitist, a materialist. They sometimes insist that you are, even in the face of contradictory evidence. A friend of mine insists I'm a fascist because instead of giving money to homeless people on the street, I donate to a homeless shelter. I've asked people out and taken them to that beloved hole-in-the-wall restaurant. You can visibly observe their disappointment that it wasn't a 5-star place with valets and crystal. And if you do something romantic or over the top, you're expected to outdo yourself the next time. Sorry, babe, but sometimes I want to eat SpaghettiOs out of the can while I wear my Walmart sweatpants. Story 4. The difference is whether you've inherited it or earned it, and where you are within the top percent. This is a great article on the massive differences of wealth within the 1% investment banker on 1%. I'm at the bottom of the spectrum, and here are my observations. Taxes suck. I pay over 50% of my income back. Thanks, California. Sacrifices. Whenever I hear people witching, it's almost always apparently that they aren't willing to do the things I've done to get where I am. Ball game on the weekend? Working. Birthday party? Working. Ski vacation? Working. Sleep? Working. Girlfriend? Working. After 5 years in graduate education, at $25,000 a year, I work 80-hour weeks every week. I hit diamond on Delta in 5 months, 125,000 miles. I have a nice 2-bedroom bungalow that I've slept in for 3 nights in February, and a new car with less than 500 miles on it since November. I miss cooking my own meals, sleeping in my own bed, and doing nothing on a day off. I grew up poor in the Midwest, so I feel like I'm making a better life for my future family. But I have to laugh when someone is so envious of my life. Yeah, the grass is always greener to some degree, especially in this OP's case where they worked hard to get to where they are. There clearly were a lot of trade-offs, and the value of money compared to the value of memories they could have created on those days off from work isn't apples to apples. Everyone has to make that call for themselves, which they hold to a higher degree. But it does seem to me that it's rare that people on their deathbeds wish that they had worked more in life. So take that for what you will. Story 5. Now, I'm not sure how to say this without sounding selfish, but I'll try. Honestly, the thing that sucks the most, not being able to spend more money on friends. Sometimes there are things that would be really fun that I know everyone would love, or just something that I really want to do. A lot of my friends can't afford to do a ton of extravagant things, which is totally cool. I understand and appreciate that I came from a very blessed background. The easiest thing would just be for me to buy everyone tickets to the concert, or just pay for the hotel, or whatever needs to be covered to ensure everyone can participate. But people get weird about that. I've been confronted about showing off or flaunting, when really, I just want everyone to have a good time. This is where you have to get creative and launder your own money in a way that makes it seem that you didn't finance everyone else's fun. Perhaps you know someone who's very good at winning those radio giveaway contests. What's the most awkward thing you've ever had to explain to your significant other? Story 1. I just remembered an incident that happened well in my past, pre-cell phone days, with an ex-girlfriend. Thanks, Internet. She used my car to drop me off at the airport so I could go visit a buddy from high school. We lived, not together, about an hour from the airport. For my trip, I had to change planes. During my layover, I got paged by the airport intercom. Confused, I walked to a courtesy phone and dialed the given number. She was on the line, freaking out and crying. When I calmed her down enough to be coherent, she told me why. It turns out, after dropping me off, she drove back to my apartment and let herself in with my key. She then proceeded to go through all my stuff. She freaked out when she found old condoms in the back of an old dresser, different brand than we'd ever used. She therefore assumed I was cheating. So here I am on a house phone in the middle of the Seattle airport, listening to a hysterical girl and trying to explain the condoms are really old, but also trying to figure out why the heck she's in my house. Breaking up with her on the spot was out of the question, as she was in my house and had my car. That relationship ended shortly after I got back home, and I changed the locks. Good call on the lock change. Story 2. We had a few friends over for drinks in my bedroom to keep the noise down. One of them looked in my bedside drawer, at my instruction, for a cigarette lighter. She laughed and pulled out a box of condoms. Over the next hour or so, we blew half of them up, I got them for free, and a few had spit or hand cream put in them, and were tied and left in various places. Someone else got out my corn magazines and left one between the pages. Another got left down the side of the bed, and someone put one on a carrot and left it on my bedside cabinet. Eventually I got them all to leave, and being drunk, went to bed without cleaning up. The girlfriend came over and was let in by the girl downstairs. She walked in, and you can imagine the thoughts that went through her head. Corn mags, condoms everywhere, used and blown up, popped, one over a carrot next to my bed, and I passed out hungover in bed, naked. Story 3. I used to be a bit naive back in high school, and a certain unscrupulous young man decided to take advantage of this and tell me that blue balls was a life-threatening condition. Fast forward a year, I'm dating a guy from a long distance. He's in public one night, and so I decide to play around and tease him via text while he can't do anything about it. Obviously, blue balls gets mentioned at some point. He, not realizing that I was serious when I said he could die from it, plays along, saying it'd be a good way to go. I could have his books when he dies, etc. He then at some point goes to bed, and thus stops responding to texts. I immediately concluded that he must have passed away. I spent that entire night convinced I'd killed my boyfriend, until he texted me in the morning, He got a great laugh out of explaining to me that you can't actually die of blue balls, despite what most men would like me to believe. Story 4. So, I really like to mess with telemarketers. I either drop some strange foreign accent, pretend I'm crazy, beating someone or something, or occasionally I pretend I'm mentally challenged. Hilarity on my part ensues. The eve of my extreme embarrassment, my partner was busy with school, so no nookie, therefore I was in another room, taking care of business. So there I was, treating my body like an amusement park, when then called the telemarketer. I decided to go the old mentally challenged route and was doing my best voice while at the same time doing a slow fap so as not to lose momentum. This was the moment my SO came in, the room echoing with my best slath voice, phone cradled on my shoulder while I was idly stroking the Cyclops. The look of horror that crossed my significant other's face is well etched in my memory. I would love to hear how you explain that. Story 5. Not me per se, but my wife and I were virgins when we met. I had read and studied about intercourse, so I naturally assumed that it was over when we both had origami. Quickly I realized it was logical to make sure she came first. Then I came last, so I wouldn't fall asleep and leave her frustrated. I guess, thankfully, she's never had trouble having an origami, so I never felt frustrated for myself in our 23 years of marriage. Because of this, she assumed this was normal. Until we got older and she spoke to other women, who seemed amazed she thinks this is normal. Some think she's arrogant or lying. You are a freaking god. As soon as we're able to make clones, let's get you first. Story 6. I faked almost 2 years of origamis. I was extremely young and had never even touched myself before, so I didn't know what an origami was supposed to feel like. I just assumed that when it felt really good, it was an origami, so I would tell him that I'd come multiple times. I was also his first, so he wasn't sure what a non-cornstar origami looked like, and took my word for it. The one time I did have an origami, 6 months into our relationship, I felt horribly guilty. Although I could bring myself to origami with my fingers after that, he never could get me off, so I just kept faking it so he wouldn't feel bad. It was a horrible idea, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him until a drunken fight, which resulted in our breakup. Story 7. I bought a t-shirt for my good friend's birthday at a novelty store. It was green with a rust-colored trombone, and underneath it, it said, Rusty Trombone. My wife comes back from some frou-frou girly store just as I'm about to pay for it at the register, holds it up and goes, I don't get it, what does that even mean? There are a few others in line, so I tell her that I'll explain it in the car, which, of course, made her want to know right away. I got the death stare from the father of a teenage girl as I whispered it into my wife's ear, and her eyes got real big. I could see the look on the dad's face. It silently said, if I end up having to explain that to my teenage daughter now, I'm going to red rum you. Story 8. My friend's girlfriend lives at a house with a name rather than a number. Inglenook Place, I believe it is. Anyway, whenever my friend had been there, her parents' bedroom door had always been open, at the angle where he couldn't see the door itself at all. A few days ago, he went over and it was closed. He was pretty shocked and asked his girlfriend about why her parents had a sign reading Nookie Corner on the door. Of course, she pointed out the name of the house itself and very innocently asked why. I think he actually explained the definition of nookie to her with the use of Urban Dictionary. Story 9. I used to have 2 male roommates, one of which used to sleepwalk. One night, when my boyfriend was sleeping over, the roommate walked half naked into my room, asking if he could get under the covers with me. I had to encourage him out of my room and back to bed without waking him up, then comfort and convince my boyfriend that my roommate had never slept in my bed before. We had recently gotten back together, and he was suspicious of my relationship with my roommates, so this incident didn't help. You can actually wake up people who sleepwalk. Yeah, I'm a bit suspicious of this roommate. I wouldn't be surprised if he was playing the long con and had been pretending to sleepwalk for a long time to build up the expectation that it was normal for him, just so that he could use it to his advantage and actually pretend like he was accidentally sleepwalking into Opie's room. I know it seems far-fetched, but I think we all know how far some guys are willing to go just for the possibility of hooking up. Story 10. There's a lot, but I once had to finally tell my husband that his breath smelled awful. It was a daily thing, and he doesn't smoke or anything, and he brushes twice a day as recommended. It was so hard for me. I said, "Honey, I'm saying this because I love you, and there may be a problem. This isn't normal. You didn't always have halitosis." Turns out he had an abscess and was also diagnosed with oral cancer at age 25. I'm glad I got the nerve to just say it. Wow, that's amazing. You saved his life. Good for you. Story 11. My hemorrhoids and the following day's procedure for such. Me. Yeah, well, they're basically just enlarged blood vessels that protrude out your anal canal and can bleed and be painful. Her. Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't sound bad. Google it. Her after Googling it. Oh my god, what the frick? That looks terrible. Story 12. I had to explain a hickey. It was located kind of on my arm, and I even had to think of where it came from when she pointed it out. Then suddenly I remembered I gave myself my own hickey, randomly sucking on my arm. Then I went to put my mouth on it, and it lined up exactly where my mouth hit my arm. Silly. I had to explain booby fricking to a woman in her mid-20s. It ended up being more awesome than awkward, though, because she was down to try it. Story 13. I was at a party with some friends, sausage fest, and needless to say, we were all plastered. Anyways, my friend Joe thought it would be funny, he had a weird sense of humor, to hold me down and administer a hickey on my neck. Well, my girlfriend at the time had a hard time believing that a burly, bearded muscle man would give hickeys out as a joke. I still don't think she ever believed me. I was the victim, god dang it. Story 14. My girlfriend thought men always had erections. The look on her face after our first time when it went flaccid was hysterical. I had to explain to her how it works. She thought we just stuffed it downward into our pants. She must have thought we were veritable titans, capable of striding the earth with endless patience as our denim prisons continually strive to rob us of our sanity. Story 15. Happened last night. I was watching Totally Spies in my room, and the episode was about a villain who was slowing down people's intelligence to caveman-like. At one point, the cavemen were grunting, and my boyfriend walked into my room and heard it. He turns around and leaves. I get a message on Facebook saying, "Enjoy your bestiality." I had to explain to him and my roommates that I was watching cartoons. Story 16. I had to explain that I usually say I don't mind about a lot of stuff, like where we get to have dinner, or if she wanted me to get up an hour earlier and make her breakfast. Never did, just saying, because she made me a happy person that really didn't mind, and not because I don't care, or am dead inside, or am an inconsiderate jackbutt, or I live to serve. Then she had to explain the story behind those scars on her forearm. Story 17. I went to BU, and at the school pub, there's a Knight's Quest where you, over time, drink all 60-plus beers they have in stock. Once you finish all the beers, there's a big ceremony where you invite all your friends, and your friends pick out a knight's name for you. I had to explain to my new girlfriend at the time, who came to the ceremony, why my knight's name was, "Sir, I'm not a chubby chaser, I'm an acceptor." Story 18. The first time my ex and I did it, she was blown away that it felt good for her. She explained how with the guy before her, he was her first, that she basically didn't feel anything, so she assumed the female was basically just a wet hole for the guy to have at. In reality, he was so small, she felt it, but nothing more than that. Story 19. I had a female friend from years back that I didn't talk to a lot, but had her on my phone. She was married, and the last I had talked to her, they were struggling with fertility problems. So one night, I got this text, which probably went to everyone on her phone, that simply said, "I'm pregnant." And of course, this is one of the times my wife picks up my phone when it buzzes. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.